She doesn't own a single line of code. She never did. She was a contractor, plain and simple, and everything she touched while she was under our roof belongs to Nexogen. My brother's voice was so loud it rattled the window blinds in that conference room on the 42nd floor. He had his hands flat on the table, knuckles white, leaning forward like he was trying to physically press me into the floor through sheer force of ego. He pointed at me without looking at me, which was something he had been doing my entire life. She walked out of that company and took our future with her. I want an injunction. I want her IP seized and transferred back to Nexogen's ownership by end of business today. I want damages. And frankly, I want an apology. I sat across from him with my hands folded on the table and my eyes fixed on a small water stain on the ceiling just above the arbitrator's head. I had been counting the seconds since he started his opening statement. 4 minutes and 31 seconds of my brother explaining to a room full of lawyers, and one very patient arbitrator, exactly what kind of worthless, disloyal, incompetent thief I was. I didn't look at him. I didn't blink too fast. I didn't shift in my chair. The arbitrator, a woman named Claire Novak who had 30 years of IP litigation experience, and the kind of expression that suggested she had heard every version of this story twice before breakfast, finally leaned forward over her notepad and looked directly at my brother. She said, "Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Have you actually reviewed the patent filing dates?" My brother's lead attorney grabbed his arm under the table. I saw it happen. My brother didn't stop talking. "Drop a comment right now, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I genuinely love knowing who's out there with me for this one." The conference room smelled like recycled air and expensive coffee nobody had touched. It was the same building where I had spent 6 years building something that my brother had convinced himself he built alone. The carpet was the same shade of corporate gray. The view was the same city skyline I used to stare at through the window during the long stretches where I was debugging code at 2 in the morning while my brother was at a client dinner taking credit for work he couldn't have. Explained under oath. I let my mind drift back for just a moment. I let myself remember the exact Tuesday afternoon my brother had called me into his office and told me he was letting me go. He had used that phrase specifically, letting me go, like he was releasing me into the wild out of generosity, like I was a fish he'd caught and decided wasn't worth keeping. I remembered the way he'd leaned back in his chair, the one I had picked out when we furnished the office together, and folded his arms behind his head. He had that smile on, the one that meant he had already decided something and was now performing the conversation for his own entertainment. "The company is scaling," he'd said. "We need specialized leadership at the technical level, people who have actually managed enterprise-level teams. We need someone with a different kind of pedigree, honestly. Different kind of pedigree. I had a computer science degree from a program he hadn't been admitted to, and a portfolio of work that was, at that point, responsible for 60% of Nexogen's billable product. I knew this because I had built the system that tracked it. What he meant, and what he did not say but communicated clearly through every word and silence and dismissive gesture, was that I had become inconvenient. Nexogen was 18 months away from a serious Series B conversation, and my brother had decided he wanted a technical co-founder with a different face and a different last name. Someone who made investors feel comfortable. Someone who didn't know where the bodies were buried because they had been in the room when my brother buried them. I had said nothing that afternoon. I sat in his guest chair, the one I had also picked out, and I listened to him explain that my contributions had been valued and my departure would be handled with the utmost respect and that of course there would be a severance package that reflected my time with the company. He offered me 4 months. I signed nothing that day. I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked out. What my brother did not know, and what I had not shared with anyone in that building, was that I had spent the previous 8 months doing something very quiet and very deliberate on the side. I had filed patents, not in Nexogen's name. In mine. I need to go back further to explain this, because it matters. When I first joined my brother's startup, 4 years before he fired me, the company was running on ambition and a seed round that was burning faster than any of us admitted out loud. We needed a technical differentiator, something that would separate us from the other firms doing what we were doing. I was the one who found it. I had been working on a compression and encryption architecture in my free time for almost 2 years before Nexogen existed, a system for securing and transmitting medical imaging data across platforms without compromising file integrity or speed. It was the kind of thing that sounds boring until you realize that every major hospital network in the country was hemorrhaging money on exactly the problem I had solved in my apartment on a laptop I bought with graduation money. When I brought it to my brother and said I think this could be the thing, he had hugged me. Actually hugged me. He had said, "You are a genius. You know that? This is the company. This is it." What he did not say, and what I was too trusting to think to ask, was whose name was going on the patents. For 3 years, I assumed we would figure that out. I assumed it would be handled. I assumed, because I was 24 years old and he was my brother and I had grown up watching him take the last slice of pizza without asking, and then explain why he deserved it, that he would do the right thing when the time came. The time came during a legal review 6 months before he fired me. The company's attorneys were cleaning up IP documentation ahead of the Series B prep, and they flagged the gap. Foundational architecture, they said. No formal assignment agreement in place. Technically, an exposure. My brother had called me in and explained that they needed me to sign an IP assignment. Standard procedure, he said. Cleanup, he said. Happens all the time in startups, he said. I took the document home. I spent a weekend with an IP attorney I found through a friend of a friend. A woman who charged more per hour than I made in a day, and who looked at the document and then looked at me and said, "Do you understand what you're being asked to sign away?" I did after that conversation. I understood very clearly. I did not sign the assignment. Instead, over the following 8 months, I filed 7 provisional patents through a Delaware LLC I had formed the previous year for a freelance project that never went anywhere. The patents covered the core architecture, the key processing methods, the data integrity verification system, everything that made the product. I filed them quietly, carefully, with timestamps that predated my employment at Nexigen by a comfortable margin, because these were methods I had developed before I ever walked through my brother's door. That part was true. The documentation supported it. The attorney I had been working with confirmed it was supported. Then I waited. My brother fired me 4 months later, which I had not predicted exactly, but had considered as a possibility. He gave me 4 months of severance. I took it. I signed the separation agreement his attorneys drafted, which was thorough in several respects but notably did not address IP ownership because my brother assumed that conversation had already been resolved. It had not been resolved. It had been deferred. I spent the next 18 months building a company, not a tech company, a licensing firm. I hired 2 people. I developed 2 new client relationships in the medical data space. I let Nexigen proceed with their Series B, which closed successfully, and their product roadmap, which was entirely dependent on the architecture I had developed, and their preliminary conversations with a publicly traded healthcare conglomerate that was very interested in an acquisition. I let all of that happen. And then, 8 weeks before the acquisition was scheduled to close, I sent a letter through my attorney to Nexigen's legal team, identifying my patents, describing the overlap with Nexigen's core product, and formally requesting a licensing conversation. The letter was polite. It was specific. It was the kind of letter that makes corporate attorneys go very quiet for several hours before they call their clients. My brother's response had been to file for arbitration, claiming I had stolen Nexigen's trade secrets, which was how we ended up in this room. Back in the present, my brother was still explaining to the arbitrator, and to anyone within earshot, exactly what category of human being I was. He had pivoted from the legal arguments to what I can only describe as a character presentation. He was now discussing my apartment, which he described as a sublet situation, suggesting I lacked the financial stability of someone who owned serious intellectual property. He mentioned that my company had 2 employees. He said the word scrappy in a tone that made it sound like a communicable disease. He said, "Claire, she came to me 4 years ago with an idea on a napkin. I built the team. I raised the capital. I made the connections. I turned her doodle into a product that a Fortune 500 company wants to acquire for $340 million. Now she wants to parachute in at the last second and claim ownership of something she couldn't have realized without everything I provided." The number 340 million hung in the air of that conference room like smoke. His attorneys were studying their documents with the focused intensity of people trying not to look at anything specific. I looked at the water stain on the ceiling. My brother was a good salesman. I had always acknowledged that. He could walk into a room and make people feel like they were in the presence of someone building something important. He had done that for 4 years, on the strength of work I was doing in the background, and he had done it convincingly enough that a Fortune 500 company was currently prepared to hand him $340 million. What he was not was a technical person. He did not know what he did not know about the architecture that had made Nexigen valuable. He did not know what a patent priority date meant, in practical terms. He did not know that his own IP assignment attempt, the one I had never signed, had actually created a cleaner record in my favor, rather than a murkier one, because it demonstrated that Nexigen knew the IP had not been formally transferred, and had attempted to remedy that. He did not read the filings. I knew this because his attorneys had only requested them from the patent office 11 days ago. And I had seen what they received, and I had seen which pages they had flagged, and I knew from the flags which sections they had actually read. They had not read paragraph 14 of the provisional filing from March 3 years ago. Paragraph 14 was going to be a problem for them. His attorney, a man who had the practiced calm of someone billing $400 an hour to be in this room, finally leaned across and said something quietly to my brother. My brother waved him off the way someone waves at a slow-moving bug. "Not now, Greg." Claire Novak, the arbitrator, let him finish. She waited the way someone waits who has already decided something but is allowing the process to complete itself for the sake of the record. When my brother finally sat down, she turned to me. "I would like to hear from the respondent." I stood up. I smoothed my jacket. I picked up exactly 1 piece of paper from the stack in front of me and I walked to the center of the room. I said, "I appreciate the time. I'll be brief." My brother made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Something closer to contempt, exhaling through his nose. The 7 patents in question, I said, were filed between 22 and 38 months ago, respectively. Their priority dates establish methods I developed between 4 and 6 years ago. This timeline predates my employment at Nexigen by a range of 6 to 18 months depending on the specific patent. I have development logs, version histories, personal correspondence, and third-party communications that support this chronology. Nexigen's own product development history, which they submitted to this proceeding, corroborates these dates because it shows the integration of these methods occurring after my initial employment, not the other way around. I held up the one piece of paper. Nexigen did attempt to obtain an IP assignment from me 26 months ago. I did not sign it. A decision to request assignment is an implicit acknowledgement that ownership had not previously been transferred. This document, submitted by Nexigen as part of their own evidence package, is the clearest available record that Nexigen knew at that time the IP was not theirs. My brother's attorney, Greg, had stopped writing. My brother was looking at me now, really looking at me. I don't think he had looked at me that directly in years. There was something in his expression that I could not quite identify. It was not yet fear. It was more like the moment before fear, the way the air feels just before rain when you're still not sure it's going to happen. I sat down. Claire Novak removed her reading glasses. She held them loosely in one hand and looked at the stack of filings in front of her. She said, I have reviewed the patent documentation submitted by both parties, and I want to address the assignment claim directly, because I think it's important we get this on the record before we go further. My brother leaned forward. She said, Nexigen's position is that the respondent developed this IP in the course of her employment, and that it therefore belongs to Nexigen under standard work-for-hire doctrine. Is that the correct characterization of your position? Greg said yes, that is correct, she said. Then I need to understand something. She pulled out a highlighted page. The provisional patent numbered here was filed in March, the filing predating the respondent's employment start date by 7 months. The development logs show an initial version of this method created 14 months before employment began. Nexigen's own product integration records show this version being incorporated in the first quarter of her employment. How does Nexigen reconcile work for hire with a creation date that precedes the employment relationship? The room was very quiet. Greg was writing something. I thought for a moment he might be writing my brother a note. I thought my brother might finally listen to Greg. My brother did not listen to Greg. My brother stood up. He said, Claire, with respect. She set this up deliberately. She filed those patents strategically. She knew we were approaching a liquidity event and she engineered this dispute to extract money she is not entitled to. This is extortion dressed up in legal paperwork. He pointed at me. She worked for me. I paid her salary. I funded the environment where these ideas grew. You can't separate a seed from the soil and then tell the farmer he doesn't own the crop. This is someone who built nothing alone trying to harvest something she didn't plant. It was a good metaphor. I'll give him that. I stood up again. I was still holding that one piece of paper. My brother looked at me the way he used to look at me when we were kids, and I beat him at something he had told people he was good at. I said, the soil metaphor is interesting. May I ask my brother a question for the record? Claire Novak nodded. I turned to face him. I said, when you filed Nexigen's Series B disclosure documents 18 months ago, in the IP ownership section, which entity did you list as the rights holder for the foundational architecture? My brother blinked. Greg was on his feet. Objection to the framing. This is arbitration, Claire Novak said. There are no objections. She looked at my brother. You can answer. My brother said, Nexigen. Obviously. The company owns the IP. I nodded. And when you submitted that disclosure, had you secured a signed IP assignment from me? He didn't answer immediately. Had you secured a signed IP assignment from any individual contributor for this specific architecture? Greg said something quietly. My brother ignored him. The assignment process was in progress, my brother said. It was a documentation formality. I placed the piece of paper on the table so he could see it. It was a single page from the Series B disclosure. I had highlighted one sentence in yellow. I said, this is Nexigen's own submission to their Series B investors. The highlighted portion states that all foundational IP is fully owned and unencumbered by Nexigen Corp. As of the date of this filing. At the time this was submitted, you had not obtained a signed assignment from me, which you have just confirmed, which means this statement to investors was materially false. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one that had existed before. This one had texture. This one pressed against the walls. My brother looked at Greg. This time Greg did not have a quiet word for him. Greg was looking at the floor. My brother said, that was an administrative oversight. Our attorneys reviewed the disclosure. Your attorneys reviewed the disclosure based on representations you made to them, I said. Specifically, the representation that the IP assignment had been completed. It had not been completed. I have the correspondence. I placed 3 more pages on the table. Internal emails. My brother to Greg. Subject line. Assignment still pending. Can we characterize as complete for disclosure purposes? We'll get signatures after close. Greg made a sound like a door closing. My brother's face had gone a color I did not have a name for. It was somewhere between gray and the kind of red that comes not from anger but from something else. Something closer to the recognition of consequences arriving. He tried once more. He said, "Those emails are confidential attorney-client communications. You can't use those." I said, "Greg is not copied on those emails. They were sent from your personal account to Greg's personal account, not his firm account." Attorney-client privilege attaches to legal advice given in the course of representation. Logistical coordination sent outside the formal legal channel on personal accounts has a substantially weaker claim. Your privilege argument was noted in the preliminary filing and denied. My brother sat down, not because he decided to, because his legs made the decision independently of the rest of him. Greg gathered his papers into a neat stack. He did it slowly, with the careful precision of someone who has decided to be very deliberate about everything that happens next. Claire Novak looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at the room. She said, "I'm going to pause here to give counsel an opportunity to confer." Greg leaned toward my brother. I could not hear what he said. I could see my brother's expression as he listened. I had seen that expression once before. The day our father told him that the family cabin had been sold and the sale had been final for 2 weeks, and the news was only being shared now because the paperwork had cleared. My brother looked at me. Not with anger this time, he said, very quietly, across the table. "You planned this," I said. "I planned for this," he said. "The whole time. You were setting this up the whole time," I said. "I started filing patents because you tried to take my work without asking. I built a company because you told me I wasn't capable of building one. I'm in this room because you filed against me," he said. "The acquisition falls apart if we don't resolve this. $340 million disappears. I know. I'd let that happen." He stared at me. I said, "I don't want the acquisition to fall apart. I want a licensing agreement. Reasonable royalties, properly documented, properly credited. That's all I asked for 8 weeks ago. That's all I'm asking for now." His attorney looked up from his papers. My brother said, "That's not all you're asking for." I said, "There's also the matter of the investor disclosure. That's a separate issue and you know it. I'm not the one who will be deciding how that gets addressed. That's between you and the SEC and your investors. But a licensing agreement that resolves the IP question cleanly is the path that doesn't require any of that to go further." The room was still. The city outside continued existing, indifferent and enormous, 42 floors below. Greg said, "We'll need a recess to confer with our client." Claire Novak said, "You have 15 minutes. My brother and Greg walked out. I sat in my chair. I turned my phone over in my hand. I thought about texting my friend who knew about all of this, who had listened to me work through every piece of it on long phone calls over the past year. I put the phone down. There was nothing to say yet. When my brother came back, he sat down without looking at me. Greg placed a term sheet on the table. It was not the one I had proposed 8 weeks ago. It was better than that one. My attorneys would need to review it, and there would be negotiation, and nothing would be final for another several weeks. But standing there in the draft language was the thing I had been working toward for 18 months. Named inventor credit on all 7 patents. A licensing fee structure that reflected actual value. A retroactive payment for the period during which the architecture had been in use. A formal correction to the Series B disclosure record, to be handled through appropriate counsel. My brother signed the term sheet. He did not look at me when he signed it. I signed where my attorney indicated. We did not shake hands. My brother left first. Greg followed him. I could hear their voices in the hallway, low and functional, pivoting immediately to how they would handle the next 12 hours. There was still an acquisition to salvage. There was still a lot of money in the room even after the licensing terms. I understood that. I had factored it in. I collected my papers. I put them in my bag in the order I would need them for the follow-up call with my attorney. I thanked Claire Novak, who shook my hand and said nothing except good luck, which I chose to take in the most neutral possible way. The elevator was empty. I pressed the button for the lobby and watched the numbers count down. Someone asked me later that week if I felt like I had won. It was my friend, the one who had listened to all the late-night phone calls. She said it over dinner, genuinely curious, without any expectation about what the answer should be. I thought about it for a moment. I said it felt less like winning and more like finally being able to breathe at a normal pace. I had spent a year holding everything at a precise tension, making sure every piece stayed in its correct position, and now I could let it rest. That was not the same as joy. It was something quieter and more durable than joy. She asked if I had talked to my brother. I said no. She asked if I was going to. I said I didn't know. Maybe eventually. There was a licensing agreement now, which meant there would be ongoing contact through attorneys, which was a kind of communication. Whether we would ever sit in the same room and have a conversation that didn't involve arbitrators or term sheets or the specific language of paragraph 14, I genuinely did not know. I had spent 6 years making something real. I had spent 4 years watching someone else take credit for it. I had spent 18 months building the structure that allowed me to reclaim it. What I had not figured out yet, and what I suspected would take significantly longer than any of those timelines, was what to do with the part of me that still remembered being 24 and believing my brother when he said, "You are a genius. You know that," and meaning it, back when it was still possible to mean it. I settled the bill. I left a good tip. I walked out into the night air of the city that had watched all of this happen without caring about any of it, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. Then I went home and slept for 11 hours. And in the morning I had 17 emails that needed responses, and I answered every single one.